Hello everybody. If you haven't already done homework 8, make sure you do it by midnight tonight. And then homework 9 is due by midnight on a week from today. It's another Excel exercise using pivot tables to make charts. I'm going to discuss it a little bit today. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about Exam 1 grades a little bit, discuss the data behind homework 9. It's something that may really help you with your project. And we're going to finish discussing focus groups, and then we'll take somebody's project and talk about a plan we could do for using focus groups for that project if that person decides to. Well, first about Exam 1, so you may have seen, like Canvas tells you when I input a grade, but there's also a module in the Exam 1 module. I put a page up with remarks about homework 1. Exam 1. So there's a couple things here. One, so everybody had different questions for questions 1 through 3, and you can get the answers to your questions at this link, but you'll need to watch this really short video to find out how you get your answers. I made a computer output that just outputted everybody's answer, and so you have to search for your student ID and then go through and find what's the correct answer to answers 1 through 3. Some remarks about Exam 1 grades are here. So this is the histogram of Exam 1 grades. Overall, they were, and no curve or anything, overall they were very good. Even had 100, so almost half the class made an A, which to me is in the 90 to 100 range, and that's very good. I was very generous on question 4, the one with the essay questions, more generous than I wanted to be, but that's just how it was. So for some people who had a much better than average answer to homework to question 4, I even added on some points. But most of you, if you tried on question 4, almost all of you got full credit for it. And then we had some in the 80 to 90 range and the 70 to 80 range. I would consider these Bs. So, we had 20% of students there. Almost 10% of students, so I'd say these are around the C range. And then we had a good many students that did really bad. And of all those students who did really bad, it was almost always the case that they just didn't do some problems. I had 2 or 3 students who didn't even answer question 4. I had a number of students who didn't even attempt question 3, which was worth 20 points. And there was a whole YouTube video showing them how to do it. And even though, and it must have been just lack of time and not wanting to, because I only had one person even ask me a question about the exam. So these right here, I do consider this failing. You've got to do better than this to pass the class. And so you've either got to, so I highly suggest you either do much, much better to pass the class and work harder, or you do need to drop the class. If you're making 50s or below on the exams, you're just not going to pass the class, and you shouldn't. But overall, I was quite pleased with them because there were so many A's in there. Any questions about Exam 1? Anything? Okay, you can always ask me in person or over Zoom if you want as well. Check something. Test, yeah. And in Canvas, I don't know what it looks, I don't know what everything in Canvas looks like on your end, but in my part of SpeedGrader, where I enter the grade, I enter like number of points out of 74 you've earned. I also put comments in on what you got wrong. And so I would describe like you missed these questions. I would put like maybe 1 point A or 1 point B. Then I'd tell you I gave you so many points off on, let's say, number 2 because of so-and-so on the graph. And then I would tell you how many points out of 74 you got, and so on. Okay. Let me show you something about homework 9. This is like the test in that you're supposed to download a Word document, put the answers there, and then upload it back in Canvas, which almost everybody did well. Generally, if y'all made a chart, you were able to insert the PDF in there well and upload it. So we didn't have any problems with that. And when you get the document, it'll look like this. And be sure to put your name on it, of course. And then it's going to describe some data. And then, like on the exam, I tell you I want you to crunch the numbers on the data and produce a chart like this with the data labels, of course. And these numbers right here are not correct. I want the chart to look like this, but with the correct answers. And the link to the data are here. You get that link and it brings up this spreadsheet. But I first want to talk a little about what this experiment was. Because this would be, most of y'all, for your project, you're choosing a new variety of a existing food product. And so for some things like Katie's Oreo stuffed chocolate recipe, cookies, that's probably not the thing you need to have a focus group discussion about. You just need to see if people like it compared to other stuff, if they buy it. And so for those kind of things, these kind of questionnaire surveys are probably more useful. And so this was a study I did. Does anybody here grow pecans at all? Well, in pecan production, you have trees that can grow from seeds. You just put the seed in the ground and let the tree grow. Most of the time, though, you put the seed in the ground, you let the tree grow a little, and then you take a tree that's a really good performer, you cut a limb off of it, and you graft it onto the stump of the other tree, and so you clone that tree, and you clone it over and over. And two of the most popular clones in Oklahoma are called Kanza, and another one is called Pawnee. Pecan clones are generally named after Indian tribes. And these are trees that are cloned because they produce consistently year after year, and they produce big, beautiful pecans that are easy to shell. Most of the time, if you just grow a pecan from seed and don't graft anything on top of it, the seeds are often really, really small. They're often really, really hard to crack. There's sometimes not much meat in there, and sometimes it will only produce pecans every 2 years. And so there's a lot of good reasons to use these high-performing clones. But one drawback of it, if you ask people, especially a lot of Oklahomans know pecans, and if you ask people what kind of pecans they like, they tend to say they like natives. When we say natives, that means just a pecan grown from seed, no cloning at all. And so every native pecan tree has its own unique genetics, just like every one of you has its own unique genetics. Whereas if we thought Lauren was particularly special, better than everyone else here, and we said we want more Laurens, we would clone her over and over. But a native pecan tree, everyone is different, but they tend to be not as good performing. But people say they like those the best, especially in certain types of surveys. And I often kind of suspected that might be because they like the word native, and I don't really know why, but I wanted to see if that was really the truth. And so what I did, over 3 years, I conducted a series of blind taste tests where I would go to places like 1907 Meat Company Restaurant, and I would buy them a free meal if they participated in a taste test research. And when they got there, before they would eat their free meal, I would give them a tray. And the tray would have little containers with one container would have a square on it, one would have a triangle on it, and one would have a circle on it. And so maybe the square had the kanza, the triangle had the circle, and what did I leave out? circle had the native, something like that. But I didn't want people to know this is Kanza, this is Pawnee, this is native, because I didn't want the words to throw them off. I just wanted them to taste the pecan without knowing what they were and tell me what they thought of it. And so I identified them with shapes. I could have used numbers like 366 and 945. But what we did, and usually when you do research like this, you have to give them the script. And so you say things like your participation is volunteer. You have to get this stuff approved by the university, and so it has to be ethical. And we tell them that, we'll just tell them things like you can stop the taste test at any time, that kind of thing. But here's what we did. It was really simple. So what we would do is step one, we said this. We said, okay, take a sip of water and a bite from an unsalted cracker first. And you're going to see we tell people to do that before they taste any new pecan, because we want to cleanse their palate. We don't want the aftertaste of one pecan influencing the taste of the next pecan. And water is good for that. But also anytime you have a food that has a high oil content, you also want them to eat unsalted cracker, because that helps remove aftertaste as well. And we say here, observe the pecan labeled with a square shape and rate the extent to which you like its appearance. And so they go here for appearance. They'd say whether they dislike it extremely, dislike very much, blah, 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 neither like nor dislike, like slightly, all the way to like extremely. And so you're going to see the data goes from 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sorry, I meant 9. And then after they rate its appearance, we then say, okay, now tell us what you think of its texture. Rate the texture. And these are called hedonic scores. Rate the flavor. And below this it says rate overall satisfaction. As you could easily imagine for one of your food products, if it's just like another brand of existing product, you can have them do something like this. Say, how much do you like the way it looks? Does it look appetizing? Do you now taste it? Do you actually like the flavor, the overall satisfaction of it? Pretty easy to do. So that was just for one pecan, but they have 2 more to taste. And so the next step is we then say, take another sip of water and a bite from an unsalted cracker, cleanse the palate, and taste the pecan from the one labeled with a circle shape. And then they give us the same data. And then the one after this says, cleanse your palate again, water, unsalted cracker, take a bite from the one, I think the next one should be a triangle, and tell us what you think there. And so in each case, for each type of pecan, the Kanza clone, the Pawnee clone, the native clone, we get the hedonic scores on how much they like its appearance, texture, flavor, and overall satisfaction. And then what I want y'all to do is analyze the hedonic scores just for flavor, and do it by gender. And by the way, as you imagine, we did randomize, say, which pecan was in the square, which was in the circle, so they were not always tasting Kanza first or always tasting native first. And these are the data in Homework 9. There's a number of stuff you can ignore. These are real data, by the way. I didn't just make this up. Treatment, you don't need to worry about that. Ordering has to do with the order of the pecans they ate. Time and place was where it was. Then we have the data that you're concerned with. Flavor of Kanza, Kanza F. Flavor of native, native F. Flavor of Pawnee, Pawnee F. And in case you forget what the scores mean, 9 means like extremely, 6 is like slightly, 2 is dislike very much. You won't have any non-responses. I took those out. So a higher number means they like it better. Some other data we collected are their gender. Up here, male was 1 and female was 2. And we have their age, but we're not going to use it. What I'm wanting, again, is a graph like this that shows the hedonic scores for Kansa. So these are the scores for Kansa, where the blue is male and the orange is female. And a way to do that, so what I'm gonna do first, I'm just gonna delete some rows so we don't show you what the true numbers are, but I'll show you how to do it. I want, just like you did on some things for exam 1, I want to do a pivot table to get the average numbers. And then I can take those average numbers and make it into a chart. And so to do a pivot table, I'm taking the first row of variable labels, just like that, and then I'm selecting all the data below it, and then I'm going Insert, Pivot Table. And what I'm interested in is the Kansa F, flavor of pecans, Native F, flavor of native, and Pawnee F, flavor of native. I look down here, and I notice that it's giving me the sum of Kansa, so the sum of the scores, but what I really want is the average value. So I say change it to the average of Kansa, and then give me average of the native, and then average of Pawnee. And then the thing I want in the rows, I want to differentiate these scores between males and females. So I can take this gender variable, drag it down here into rows, and I have my data. So I have the hedonic scores for Kansa, Native, and Pawnee for males, Kansa, Native, and Pawnee for females. Of course, you'll get different numbers because I deleted some observations, but you get those right numbers, and then you just make that chart out of it. The chart here. And by the way, generally what you should find is that people actually like native pecans the least. So even though in surveys they'll say they like native, when in a blind taste test they actually don't. With some other research, we found out the main reason was because the natives will look smaller and the flavor is basically all driven by appearance. So the bigger, prettier pecan, the better they say it tastes. And so all I ask is you do a chart and make it look, basically identical to this. I'm reminding you of all these little, I know it looks like I'm being anal retentive here, telling you exactly what the y-axis should be, no grid lines. I'm making sure you can change things in a chart. And then the other question is, just like for the last homework, I had you listen to what at least I thought was an interesting podcast and summarizing it. I want you to do this here. This is a podcast about how salmon sushi became popular. It used to be that no one would eat salmon sushi because the salmon around Japan have a parasite. You don't eat that, but you can get them from Norway that do. And it was a big effort on the part of the sushi industry to make salmon acceptable for sushi. And you'll hear about how exactly they went through that. And so all I want you to do is summarize it here. I'm saying a minimum of 400 words. Look, all I do when I grade these is I read it and I think to myself, did they listen to the whole thing? I just want enough to know that you listened to the whole thing and you got it. And you do that, you get full credit. If it looked like you didn't, I scrutinize it a little more. If it looks similar to someone else's, I go find that someone else's. And if you copied it, I give you an F shriek and you cry and run home to mommy and daddy and your life is ruined, so don't do that. And so again, having this, going through the homework, it gives you a really good example of how you can set up research for your paper. And you can imagine, you can go in for writing your paper, if you're doing a taste test like this and you want to do something like this, I want you to give me the figures, like show me the questions you're going to ask, devise the questionnaire. And this gives you an example of how it looks. So what we're doing now is we spent most of last class talking about what a focus group is, and we started to talk a little bit about how one is run. The main thing was to give you an idea of exactly what a focus group is. What we're going to be talking about here is how you actually establish a focus group and how you analyze the results. And we're going to be using Mr. Purvey's project because his would be a really good for focus group. And so, like Tom, if you go and do focus groups as part of your plan, I mean, you just take these slides and it shows you, and you take the textbook, shows you how to do it. You don't need to do more than what's in here. It gives you a lot of details already. And just as a reminder of Mr. Purvey's project, his is a lot different because where everybody else's was either a generic food product or a different variety. He's looking at more like a service where if you're a company and you want to add value to your product by giving consumers information about how the food was raised. His would be a service where a company pays him to like add labels to it, or maybe one of those QR scanners, and people at the restaurant can scan it, and then it brings up information about what the consumer wants to know. You know, where was it raised, that kind of thing. Now, see, there's a lot of, like we talked about once before, there's a lot of unknown details there. Like, what is it that consumers actually want to know? Is it just where the farm came from geographically, or was it how the animal was raised? We don't really know, and so that's something a focus group can be very useful for. And so what I'm going to do is as I go through this description of how a focus group is run, I'm mainly going to be using his example. So let's say Tom wants to do a focus group. He wants to find out exactly what type of information consumers would actually like to know, be willing to pay for regarding this service about providing information on food. Well, the first thing he needs to say is, well, what kind of focus group sample are you going to get? So you need to recruit the right type of participants. You remember the Bud Light commercial we left off on that had that awful slogan? Where the slogan was, eliminate the word no from your vocabulary. And suppose we said you were that female who knew this was bad, and so you suggested to your obnoxious alpha male counterparts that they needed to focus group it, and they put you in charge of the focus groups. Who was the one demographic you definitely want to be in that focus group sample? Women, right? You don't want more of the alpha males, right? You want women in there because you're concerned about it having that creepy sexual assault tone to it, so you want to have women in there to see if that's the case. So whenever you're doing a focus group, you need to think about what it is you're after, and so who you want. Some of you had to do a thing about meat products, so you wouldn't want vegetarians in there, so you'd want to recruit meat eaters. All right, there are times when you want a representative sample. You had one assignment that had to do with those auctions for milk, and we would talk about how to do market research, and we discussed the thing of a representative sample. So if you wanted to know how people were going to vote, say in the presidential election or something, then you'd probably want a representative sample because you want your sample to represent the country. And so if it would be representative there, you'd want the percent of males and females in the sample to be about the same amount as it would be for the country. The percent of Native Americans to be about the same as it would be for a country. Sometimes, though, you don't want a representative sample. One example, so for like Tom, maybe Tom's business plan was mostly going to be geared towards customers at places like Whole Foods and Sprouts. Let's just say that was the case. If that was the case, then in his research program, he can say that the sample of consumers he wants is Whole Foods shoppers, people like that, people who already pay a higher premium for food and are really picky about it. Or it might be his business plan. This is for something like Walmart. And it might be that he thinks this is something that would be valued by all consumers, in which case he can say, I want a representative sample, meaning I want the sample to look like the nation at large. Either way is fine. You just got to have a good justification. You got to say what kind of sample you want and why. Like if I disagreed with Tom about whether he should have a representative sample or not, that wouldn't matter as long as I thought his defense was good, his justification was good. Because in reality, I may not know any better than Tom whether he should target Whole Foods or other places. As we talked about. Another thing you want to do is you want to avoid sample selection bias. So you don't want to just do a focus group with people who would be willing to do it for free because, well, maybe those people are a little weird. You know, people take their time out to be in focus groups for no particular reason. Remember when I said when I did my pecan taste test, I gave people a free lunch to go there? Well, that was mainly because I didn't want just the kind of people who enjoy doing taste tests. I wanted normal people. And so I wanted to be able to give people who wouldn't normally do a taste test in a survey an incentive to do it. And giving people a free lunch was a good way to do it. Yeah?
So like if we wanted to select people for the sample, could I stand like in front of the meat counter at Walmart and as people are going say, hey, I need you to participate in the survey and offer to buy them whatever meat they're going to buy?
Yeah, so the question was, could you do a recruiting system where, if say it's meat, could you stand in front of the meat counter and recruit people as they go by say buying them a steak or something for participating? Yeah, you certainly could. And I think they used to recruit focus groups a lot like that. They used to just walk up to you in the mall and recruit you, but people don't like that much anymore. But in the grocery store, I've done that before. So you know the willingness to pay numbers y'all did for guaranteed tender steak on the exam, question 2. That's how they did that. People in a grocery store, and it was my friend who did the study, and people came by and he said, hey, if you're willing to taste these 2 steaks and participate in this little interview research question, I'll give you a free steak. So yep, you certainly can. And so like if you were wanting Whole Foods consumers, you know, how do you target Whole Foods people? You go to Whole Foods. That'd be a good way to do it. Yep. Yeah, I once did that when I studied people's preferences for antibiotic-free pork. I went to what used to be in Sprouts, Consumers IGA, and recruited people there. And we gave them, we gave away free pork chops for participating. And of course, the focus groups, you got to get people as a group. And if you don't have enough people coming by, that may be harder. And for people to give up like a whole hour, to have to go somewhere else at a certain time and to like sign up for something, like sign up for Tuesday night at 7 o'clock and give up an hour at a time, which ends up being 2 hours when you have to travel and stuff like that, then you need to give them more, like $75 or something. And you generally want to recruit people using multiple methods, like you want, and I'm going to contradict myself. Sometimes we'll actually do research here at OSU with OSU faculty and staff, but we try to make sure we get different staff and different students and different faculty. Ideally, you use multiple ways of recruiting, everything from putting up signs to getting word on the street to social media, have people sign up, because that helps you get a more diverse array of people. But sometimes you just have to go with the easy recruiting methods, because recruiting's a lot harder now than it used to be. You know, it used to be salespeople could just come up to your door and ask you to try a new product and talk to you about it. But now people don't want to, you just can't do that. I don't want people coming to my door because first my dogs go wild and I have to put up the dogs and then I have to deal with these people. It's a lot harder to recruit than it used to be. And then I've got conduct 3 to 5 focus group sessions for each strata. You may not have heard the word strata before, but think about it like this. Suppose Tom is interested both in what Whole Foods shoppers think of his idea, of his service, but also regular Walmart shoppers as well. So he wants to do a representative sample and a sample of Whole Foods people. Then as a general rule, what he'd want to do 3 to 5 focus groups of Walmart, of Whole Foods shoppers, and then 3 to 5 focus groups of regular shoppers. Just so you have enough people in each strata that you can tell some differences. So you can just think of a different strata as a particular type of demographic. One demographic being Whole Foods shoppers, another demographic being people who are representative of the country or representative of a town or something like that. And so like when Tom's doing his thing, he can just go down this list and describe what he chose and why, just based off that. But Tom would also have to describe how the focus group should be run. He's got to give some instructions to the moderator. And so what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about the art of conducting a focus group. And they're not hard, but there are a few things you need to really pay attention to. You've got to, let me go ahead and put up. You got to set the mood. They have to trust that the moderator is someone they can be honest with. So if you're doing if Tom was doing this, they wouldn't want to bring in the inventor or the owners of his company to reveal the new product because that person's going to be biased and they're going to, if you've got an idea, you're just going to be more biased towards those ideas. You're not going to explore the bad stuff as much. And so you want the moderator to be able to tell them, hey, I'm a professional moderator. I do market research. I don't work for the company. I get the same amount of money no matter what you say. So all I want is your complete honesty. And you're going to be video and audio recording this. And, people usually act different when the spotlight is on them. So you want to make sure you realize that they understand that they can say whatever they want without those comments being linked to them in public. So you tell them, yes, we're recording this, video or audio, but what we're going to do is we're going to make written transcripts of what you say. We're going to replace your name with an ID number so that when we analyze the results, you are completely anonymous. That way people can feel free to say whatever they think. You just portray yourself as a conduit for their thoughts. You don't try to control what they say, but sometimes you got to maintain control over the group. Make sure some people get heard. Make sure some people don't talk too much. As a general, you kind of have a friendly rapport with them. It's always good to, usually what you do is you have a nameplate where they put their first name in front and you refer to them by their names, by their first names. And there's some tips about how you would go through. So, that first thing, that slide we just showed you here, Tom really wouldn't need to say anything about this because we're assuming he's hiring a professional moderator and he doesn't need to tell a moderator how to do their job. You may need to know it for that kind of stuff for exam 2, but he doesn't need to discuss it in his paper. But he has to give the moderator enough information that they know how to run the group. So you got to start with some kind of item of interest. And so we've talked about how focus groups have been used to evaluate political messaging during a war. 1950s housewives' preferences for cake mixes, things like that. There was a farcical video where they were evaluating a book cover. And so what is Tom going to show these people to have them evaluate? Probably what he wouldn't want to do is just get up and just describe it in words. Because as you know, it's just so easy to ignore words. We like things to look at, to envision. And so maybe what Tom could do is he could have either a real mock grocery counter, a grocery store aisle, or a big poster that looks like a grocery store aisle. And you bring people in a focus group and you say, go ahead and pick out a food here you would choose, you might eat. And you get your phone and use the QR scanner to get information about it. And so people actually go and they use their QR scanner. One thing you're seeing right away is how many people actually know what that is, right? If you got half the people saying, I don't know how to do that, that's really telling you something important. If everybody knows exactly what to do, that tells you something important too. Yeah. And then they go in and maybe once they scan it, what comes up is, what kind of information would you like to know? Meaning the words there. So he's not giving them information, like if it's pork, he's not showing them a video about how the pork was raised because he's wanting to find out what information they actually want to know. And so after everybody does that, then you sit them down and you say, okay, Janet, for this food you chose broccoli. What kind of information would you have liked to have seen there about your broccoli? Bill, for your pork chop, what kind of information would you have liked to see? And then people are going to say different things. Maybe the person about broccoli said they wanted to know whether it was organically raised or if chemicals were used a lot. And the person buying the pork, they wanted to know if gestation crates were used or something like that. But the point is, you give them something specific to think about. And you want to take a poll periodically. It's a way of getting people active. So I'll give you keeping people active keeps them involved. So just a second ago, William here was having trouble staying awake. And a lot of times what I used to do, it's okay, William, we all have that trouble. I fall asleep in faculty meetings all the time. All faculty members sleep at faculty meetings at some point. So when they get on to you about sleeping in class, they're hypocrites. They do the exact same thing. Actually, when I applied for my job here and gave my seminar, the department heads fell asleep during it. Still got the job though. And then, so what kind of poll might Tom do? Well, suppose they've already gone through and everybody's told what kind of information they'd like. And when people first tell you what kind of information they like, it might just be the first thing they thought of. So maybe Janet, who first said organic, after she hears another person say, I'm interested in where it was raised or the carbon footprint, she thinks to herself, that's actually more interesting to me because whenever it's actually organic, they're going to label it that. I don't need a smartphone app to tell me that. And so her mind has changed. And so what you want to do is, after everybody has just thrown out ideas of what kind of information they want, you say, okay, let's review some of the things that we've talked about, and let me take a poll on which ones you're most interested in. So perhaps as people gave their examples of what kind of information they want, she's writing it on one of those big pads. She has organic, geographical location, how the food was produced, that kind of thing. And so she says, I'm going to go through each list, and if that piece of information is of most interest to you, raise your hand. And she goes, organic. Raise your hand if this is the most interesting thing to you out of everything on this list. And then she goes to geographic location and so on. And so what polling helps you do, It's sometimes a way of forcing both you and the subjects of assimilating everything they've heard and trying to synthesize what they think about it. And it's a way of everybody acknowledging the fact that the first thing people say is not always what they wanted to say or their preferred thing to say. Just like when you get in an argument, you know, you have some kind of comeback, and like as soon as you leave, you've got a much better comeback, you know? Yeah.
So, like, in that Sweet Baby Ray's, in the Sweet Baby Ray's video with the barbecue sauce and the different lid types in there, so they had both types on the table, and then she was taking a poll on, like, which one do you prefer, which one do you not prefer? Is there any chance, like, when they do that, people in that panel could be biased by the outcome of that poll? Because if everybody says, yeah, I like this one over there, they're more apt to go along with that, because popular opinion might be top notch.
Yeah, so the question there was, would having people publicly raise their hand about their preference, the fact that it's public in nature, would that cause it to be biased? I'd say yeah. Just like sometimes if you do ask students, like, when do you want to test? And there's one day and like everybody's hands go up and you're the only person who wants on another day, but you don't raise your hand because you don't want to look like the one different person there. Yeah, it does. And you just have to accept that and decide for yourself how seriously to take it. Yeah, sometimes there's always going to be, anytime you're in a group doing stuff, there's going to be some kind of bias there. And when you're doing a focus, just like the comments people make are going to bias things. You know, what you think about is going to be impacted by what people said before you. And so when you're doing a focus group, the implicit assumption is that the information that comes out of the group conversation is better, despite its biased nature, than what you would get if you talked to each individual person alone. Because, you know, even just talking to people, each customer alone can have its own bias. Everything you do is going to have some bias. Almost everything has a bias except a real test market where you actually go out and put things for sale. That's always what decides. You know, you're trying to discuss this product, and so you want to know what they think about it, but you're also, it's an exploration too, so you want to explore different facets of it. And so what we talked about so far with Tom's product, it's like we're trying to figure out what information does people want. But there may be some other things that we haven't thought about. So maybe after we get the information about what kind of information people want, maybe we just say, well, what do you think of this service overall? And you just throw out just a general question like that, not knowing, you know, and people may say absolutely nothing, but then someone may just kind of blurt out and say, no matter what you put up there, I'm going to think it's BS anyway. It's just corporate BS. They're going to show the good side of everything. They're not going to tell you anything bad. And maybe this is something Tom hasn't really even thought about because he just assumed consumers would mostly believe what was said. Well, then the moderator then would say, okay, I can see that. Does anybody else feel the same way? And maybe 1/3 of the group raises the hand, meaning they're skeptical about the information. And then you say, what would make the information have greater credibility to you? And then maybe they would say something like, if it was a third party information. And so what Tom's trying to be is a third party, selling a service to provide information about different people's food. And so Tom and his company can establish standards about what information is presented. And so again, what you're just doing there is you're just trying to look at things from a lot of different perspectives to see what may come up. And as you see, if you watch different focus groups, you'll see you want to get the group to discuss and you want everybody to say things, so you go from one person to another. You call on different people. You ask one person to respond to what another person thinks. It's ideally the way you run a class. You know, I'd love to be able to teach some of the stuff and have input from different students, but the difference is when you're up here, I'm trying to teach things that you don't know much about. Whereas what you're doing here, all you care about is what people know and think. And so it's easier for people are more willing to say what they think. Sometimes you ask for volunteers. Sometimes asking one respondent whether they agree with another person. It's an art there. And you just got to feel your way through it and just intuitively decide whether you're eliciting responses in the right way. And so one way I like to describe focus groups is being, you start with a simple open-ended question and it elicits a cascade of insights in focus groups as one subject's remarks stimulates comments from others, just like a drop of water ripples all around it. Give you an idea, we're going to listen to a brief audio, what I think is a pretty good focus group moderator.
We're not going to go around the circle anymore. We just need to just join in whenever you have something to say. We're not going to go around the circle anymore. We just need to just join in whenever you have something to say. What to you all makes a good doctor? What does it take to be a good doctor, would you say?
One that listens.
One that listens, Mary says? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what you think, Eileen? Okay.
Yes.
And what else about a doctor makes a good doctor?
Makes you feel comfortable when you're in the office.
Okay.
Makes it interesting. Yeah.
And how would the doctor do that? Or how would he show that?
By just talking to you and being concerned about your problem. Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts about what makes a good doctor?
Maybe touching you,
This is Jenny.
you know, not touching you all over, but you know, like nice touch,
Yeah. Right.
and that's very good.
Tender
A
loving
person
care.
feels
Yeah.
good with that.
Uh-huh.
Nice personality.
Yeah.
Okay, that's Dorothy. What do you mean by that? Nice personality. What
Well,
kinds of things?
I think they got to show that they're interested in you, you know.
Okay. Do you have any ideas of how they might show how they're interested?
The one thing you definitely see from that moderator, she's not nervous at all, right? I mean, she seems like a pro. And I'm sure she didn't feel like that the first time she did it. And so it's mainly a thing of experience. It's kind of like when I first started teaching, you know, like you preparing for your first class, you're like, how am I going to fill up an hour and 15 minutes? And you end up preparing like 3 hours for it, get everything done. But then with a little bit more experience, you realize it's actually easy. And y'all know how professors, we can just stand up here and talk for 3 hours. No problem. It's just a matter of experience with it and not being so nervous, having some confidence. All right, then we are at the part where we're talking about how to summarize the results. With focus groups, you don't really get numbers. You can't create a bar chart like we could with my pecan data. It's qualitative in nature. So I'm just going to show you some general ways in which you can analyze these things. You know, Tom, if he did focus groups, would have to provide some insight on what kind of output he'd like to see, and so we'll describe what he could ask for. This was from a focus group, a real focus group, where they asked who in particular has influenced your dental habits. Yeah. Like, I actually went in the dental office last week, and my dentist asked me, he says, Bailey, when was the last time you flushed? I said, dude, you were there. Yeah, oh, you laughed. I finally got y'all to laugh. I wouldn't even need to have the laugh track to that. Well, here they did this focus group, and you know, people would say, some people said my dentist had a particular influence on me, my hygienist, the same dentist I've had since 1983, my kids, I need to set a good example. And so what they did, they had a category code. So notice that one person said, my dentist had a particular influence on me. Another person said, family dentist. That's kind of the same thing, right? So they gave them a code of A. Let's see. C, my kids. C, my mom is living proof. C, my sister, family. So they coded C for family. And so that's coding in themes. And what Tom may want to ask for is information summarizing different themes. So what kind of themes could this be? We've already discussed some. One theme could be the type of information people want. Another thing could be what gives the information credibility. Another thing could be, would people even stop to use it, that kind of thing. And nice thing about this for paper, there's no right or wrong thing. As long as you just say something reasonable, I can't say you're wrong. If Tom did this and didn't say one theme should be the type of information people will want, well, that should count off. That just to me seems like one of the most important things. But here, the good thing is you can always make sure you have a right answer just by justifying it well. And you don't have to have many themes. You could have 3 main themes. And yes, I may read it and say, I would have also added this theme and maybe this theme. But I probably would, as long as you had 3 themes that were good, I'm not going to count that against you. This is an art. There's no one way of doing this. And so what you do for results, the first thing you do is you transcribe the results, meaning you take the audio, you put it on paper. Nice thing about now is that there are the artificial intelligence bots they have. You know how like when you upload a video to YouTube, it will transcribe what you say? Some people better than others. It doesn't know what I'm saying. But some people, especially from like the Midwest and Kansas, it knows exactly what they're saying. You can take an audio file. I use a service called Trent. You upload it, and it does its best, AI machine, to interpret it. And then you go in and you listen to what's said, and you see what it wrote, and you just edit it as you go along. So this is a lot easier than it used to be. Familiarity, then if Tom was doing the analysis himself, he'd want to read the transcripts. But if he's hiring people, the marketing group's going to read the transcripts. They're going to just familiarize themselves, remind themselves everything that was said, and then code the transcript for themes. And that's what we've got here. When I've done this, I would go through the transcript and I'd put like A. A is a theme, and then on another sheet of paper, I'd say A equals so-and-so. And as I'd go through, each time I saw that theme, I'd mark A. And then, to summarize the results, I'd go back through everything and say, where's A? Let me get the quote from it. But actually, there's software now that can do this for you. Like you can highlight or mark and code it as A, and it'll keep track of it for you. There's obviously a lot of judgment here, isn't it? What to think as personal judgment, and, you just have to do the best you can. And then you summarize the results somehow. And they're usually just bullet points, words. Sometimes you can get a graph out of it. But this is a focus group of different things like what women think they should gain. What women think they should gain weight during pregnancy. You should gain weight during pregnancy, by the way. It's a good thing, usually. And so, but how much? What do women think? So, most of the women in this focus group said, whatever the doctor says, I think I should gain. Next most frequent response was 25 to 35 pounds in the thing. So you just take the results and you summarize them usually in bulletproof form. And here, you remember I said the importance of research is completeness and clarity. This is the completeness part. You're transcribing everything that was said. Somebody's reading, and usually for coding the themes, you have 2 coders to make sure that the results of the code isn't just one person. I've gotten by with just one before. And so this is the completeness, and then for the clarity, Tom's trying to start a business. He hired a marketing firm to do this for him. He doesn't have time to go through all his transcripts unless he just wants to. But it's very important for him for someone to just summarize what they said. Another way of summarizing it, you can have general categories. So this was a thing about factors adolescents view as influencing their food choices. So this is where, if I remember right about this study, they went to a school let's say like a high school, and they recruited people to be a focus group, and they said, what influences what types of food you eat? And they said a level 1 factor. So this was the most important things: hunger, food cravings, appeal of food, time, convenience. Now you remember it was that simple when you could just eat whatever you wanted and nothing happened to your body? You might be still at that age. But then you had other things like factors of secondary importance, parental influence. Nobody listens to their parents, right? Perceived benefits, the situation, not the guy from Jersey Shore, but the actual situation. And so you have actual categories: most important, second most important, third most important. Pretty simple. And that's with focus groups. And if Tom chooses to use focus groups, I think we've been very helpful for him. And there's nothing wrong with using the things we discussed here. Good to have you here, man. Haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, I got sick for a while.
How sick were you?
Enough to get quarantined.
Did you go back home for quarantine or?
I stuck around.
Okay. Nice having you back too, Lauren. Okay, that's all I have for today. I'll see you Monday